Hey everybody, I'm so excited to talk more about my favorite topic, which is teaching. So we're going to be diving even deeper into the nitty-gritty and what goes into a lesson and more tips, even tips for teaching online too. So our objectives for this talk are to know the way that you can teach, be able to coach students on a learning mindset, know the mechanisms of teaching a lesson, and then we'll go over oodles of advice, including advice for teaching online. One quick question, is there a way to get that screen working too? Thank you. So why am I talking about this? I got into this a little bit in my last talk, but I quit coding in college because of bad teaching. I was in a weed out class, which I'm sure a lot of you who did computer science in college had to do as well. And it made me feel like I just wasn't good enough. I was spending all-nighters trying to implement Sudoku solving algorithms, and I just felt like if it was taking me all night to get like a B+ in a class, then it just wasn't a thing that I was born with, and I wasn't going to be able to do it. So I studied education in college. I went through my teaching semester in a local elementary school with 7th and 8th graders, which everybody always groans at, but they're really fun because they're kind of like in between little adults and kids still. So I like that age group. And then I accidentally became a software engineer. I was working in a data entry type job and figured out that I could automate most of it, which led them to introducing me to being a software engineer, and I got my first job that way. And then I started teaching guest lectures at a coding boot camp. And it was awesome to see everybody's eyes glaze over and information click with them. It was so cool to see. And I was so nervous the first 100 times that I was in front of a classroom, but eventually got more and more comfortable with it. And then I started teaching full-time for them. And when I started teaching full-time, I was like, I'm not going to be a daily practicing software engineer anymore, so I need to keep my skills fresh in some other way. And so I challenged myself to start sharing content online, started blogging, and more recently creating YouTube videos and talking at things like this. And it made it so that I could teach a lot more people than I could in a classroom. So eventually my job became teaching students how to teach, but also teaching teachers how to teach. And that was a really, really awesome thing to be able to do. And now I lead developer advocacy, which to me is like another form of teaching. I just get to teach a different audience. So we'll be talking about all those things throughout this lesson. But I feel so lucky. I've been privileged to teach hundreds of people in person, or thousands, and then millions and millions online. It really scales well on the internet. I've been lucky to teach kids, newbies, engineers, junior devs, you name it. And you probably already teach too. We talked about this a little bit in the keynote, but you probably answer questions online. You may mentor people at work. You may create content or manage people or speak at events like this. And all these teaching tips are relevant to that as well. Because when you're doing any of these things, you're teaching. So there's so many reasons that you should teach as well, and you should improve these skills. So you're reinforcing your own knowledge. If you can't explain something to somebody in simple terms, it probably means that you don't fully understand it. And challenging yourself to teach that thing will make it so that you have much deeper knowledge than you would otherwise. Also, for us managers out there, we can delegate our work a little bit more easily if we can teach somebody else how to do it. People also seem to look at you as an expert the more that you teach things. I've talked about JavaScript things that I only knew about because I was teaching them all over the world, and that's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And you also get to help people on a less selfish note and learn yourself. So teaching is a really awesome thing to get involved in. So let's first talk about the mindset behind teaching and the mindset that you should instill in your learners. So first, learning is hard, and I'm a walking example of that. I thought learning to code was the hardest thing ever, and it only clicked for me once I was doing it on the job. So be empathetic. It's all about empathy, and not everything is going to click right away. Be patient with your learners and understanding with them. Put yourself in their shoes. They may be struggling with different things than you struggled with, but that's okay. You struggled with some other things too, and maybe they clicked with that a little bit easier. So stick with them. Also, think about their lives outside of the classroom, especially with the pandemic. People's lives are changing. They may have kids at home that they didn't before. People's lives are in turmoil. And that's something that you should really think about in the classroom. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And self-actualization, which I would say a lot of new knowledge falls under, is at the very tippy top of the pyramid. Whereas physiological needs like shelter and safety, which a lot of people may be lacking more than normal right now, are down at the bottom. So they're the base of the pyramid. It's going to be very hard to do the higher pieces of the pyramid if you don't have the bottom. And so make sure that you're fitting those needs first for your students. It's going to be incredibly hard for them to learn or fully perform if those basic needs aren't being met. And so be really understanding of that. If you need to push around deadlines, they come first. They're much more important than any artificial deadline that you have set for them. So growth mindset. Read the book Mindset if you want to learn more about this, but it's been proven, again, that if you believe that you can learn new things, that's one of the biggest predictors of success. If you believe that your talent and your skills can be expanded, that's going to make it so that those skills can actually be expanded. If you think that you're fixed and you're set with your current skill level and your current knowledge, it's going to be very hard to learn those new things. So make sure that you're believing in yourself or you're instilling that in your students. Celebrate their wins as well. I know that learning can be emotional. I showed this graph before, but that valley of despair really does happen, and you need to be with them through that point and tell them to expect that. Again, this is the very first thing that I showed students on day one, is you're gonna be going through this emotional roller coaster over and over and over again. You're not alone in that. It's going to feel scary. You're going to hate it when it happens, but be prepared for it. It's going to happen to all of you at some point. And I think this is something that you should prepare like coworkers for as well. You're going to have these struggles at some point, but you got it. Let's get through it together. It's also not a linear process. I think a lot of people think that they're going to start learning something and then they gain more knowledge and gain more knowledge and gain more knowledge, but it doesn't really work that way. It's more like there are highs and lows and peaks and valleys, and your confidence increases and decreases over time. So definitely tell your learners about that. Also, you don't want people to be stuck with their one skill set, so make sure to teach them how to teach themselves. And you can do this through teaching people how to use Google filters. You can do this through showing people how to find good resources online. You can tell them that copy and pasting something isn't the way to go. Like if you're teaching somebody how to build a game in JavaScript, if they Google how to build tic-tac-toe in JavaScript and copy and paste that into their code, they learned absolutely zero. And so teaching them skills like that of, hey, you should research stuff. Developers do this all day, every day. If I didn't have Stack Overflow, I couldn't do my job. But if you're copying and pasting these huge chunks without understanding them, that's doing a disservice to you. Instead, break down line by line what you're learning and put that in line by line. Instead of searching tic-tac-toe in JavaScript, search how to reverse a string in JavaScript. Get that one line of code at a time instead of the chunk of code. Build a classroom culture where everybody can contribute. This is one of my biggest things. So on the first day of class, I would also have students collectively build a classroom constitution. So what are the things that we want to see from each other in the classroom? How are we going to make each other feel comfortable here? And I want that to be a joint effort with adults. Everybody has their own insights and perspectives, and we can put those all together to make a classroom culture where everybody feels comfortable. Also, I know that cold calling is a very popular technique with teaching, and it makes sense because that's how you can check for understanding and really see that everybody is understanding something, but a lot of people, especially anxious people, aren't going to deal super well with that. So I recommend warm calling instead. And so what that would be is, hey, can somebody in the front row answer to me what this question is? And that's going to put a little bit more pressure on than saying the whole entire classroom. It's going to give you a smaller subset of people, and people are going to be more likely to respond as well. And if nobody responds, then you can be like, front row on this side of the room. You can keep narrowing down the space, but warm calling is going to make people generally feel more comfortable than cold calling. If they don't know the answer, that can make some people feel really, really anxious and shut them down. So think through that. And make sure that you have your students reflect on what they've learned as well. So at work, you normally would do some sort of retrospective at the end of each project or sprint. And I would do that with my students too. After we learned a topic, we would come back together and talk about what they learned, what their accomplishments were, what the things that they struggled with were, what they still need work on. And so coming together and reflecting on those things made it so that they could keep learning next time. I, as a teacher, also knew what I had to re-hit on because people weren't understanding it. So I really, really recommend reflection. Also, it's so important if you're learning something yourself to have that metacognition of here's what I understand, here's what I don't understand, here's what's working for me when I'm learning, here's what's not working for me. It's going to help you be a more effective learner and really get to know yourself. Like, for example, I cannot do YouTube videos. I make YouTube videos, but I can't watch them. They're just too long, and I have trouble skipping through them. So I know that about myself, but I have somebody on my team who only learns through YouTube videos. That's how he learns absolutely everything, and that's awesome. It's great for him. It's just not my learning style. And so if I can reinforce that and know that about myself, that's going to help me learn better in the future. So let's dive into some details. What should a lesson actually look like? So I did this structure before, but I'm actually going to give you concrete examples this time. So learning objectives should be very concrete, tangible takeaways that students should take away from that lesson. So if I was able to teach, if I was teaching React, for example, my learning objectives might be, at the end of this lesson, students should be able to define what a React component is, define what JSX and the virtual DOM are. Students should be able to explain why React is helpful in developing applications, and students should be able to create a React component. So students know when they're walking into the classroom, hey, these are the 4 things in this class that are the most important. I should structure my learning for this. In addition, I'm sure if you ever taught something, you get a lot of questions. Some questions are really great. Some questions are pretty off topic. And maybe you're teaching a beginner workshop and some tenure expert is in the audience and is like, hey, now teach me about this really advanced thing. Well, if you know the learning objectives up front, hopefully that will filter more of that away. And it's going to really intimidate your beginner learners if people are asking really advanced questions. And so if you set those expectations up front, and that's why I do this with talks too. I want somebody to not stick around if it's not something that's going to be helpful for them. So I'm going to give them the learning objectives right up front. If it's not relevant, that's fine. It's a better fit for somebody else. Then comes framing. So why is this thing so important? And you can do a lot of storytelling with this. Storying and telling is one of the best ways to keep people engaged. So here's a story of me using React at work. Here's why it was really helpful. Or here's why Facebook created React in the first place. All of those types of things hook people in and make it so that they want to learn about that thing, especially if they know that it's going to be relevant for their career in the future. And you should do this with things like blog posts and YouTube videos too. Why should somebody care about this thing? Why should they watch it? Then the I do, we do, you all do, you do. I do, show a diagram, explain something up front. Then we do, we all write code together. You all do, group exercises. I love this because a lot of times some people are going to click with things really, really fast and other people are going to do it a little bit more slowly. So you can challenge those students who are really getting it to teach the other people who are getting it less. And so those people who are struggling a little bit more get it taught to them a second time by somebody new who might be able to explain it in a way that fits them better. But they also get teaching experience. So I really, really enjoy that group exercise piece of it. Plus, you want a positive classroom culture, like I was saying. And so if you have people get to know each other, it's going to make the classroom more fun for everybody. And if people know each other, they're going to be more willing to interact as well in the classroom and answer questions if they feel comfortable. So that's a really important piece of this. Sometimes I will pre-create groups. Sometimes I will just do randomized groups depending. And then you do as the independent work, and it is important for you to test yourself on your own. And so that last part of doing things independently is important as well. So it's so important to appreciate the process rather than the results. And a lot of times you'll see these really hard deadlines in classes, and I think especially with programming where sometimes you go down the wrong road, but you learn so much from that wrong path, having those really fixed, set in stone deadlines can make it so that people feel so much pressure that they're only appreciating the results, not the process. And the process is really the important part. I don't care if you have this working app. What I care is that you tried the thing a bunch of times and learned some stuff along the way. That's the most important part. Make sure that people are practicing. Writing the code is the thing that's going to make you learn code. If you don't do that, it's not ever going to stick. So make sure that you're doing that and doing it independently too. I see this so much with beginners where they'll do tutorial after tutorial after tutorial, but they'll never get out of that cycle of tutorials. Instead, they'll just keep doing them and do them on a new topic now. Instead, but they can't actually build anything, and that breaks my heart because if they had practiced, it would have really helped. And then checks for understanding, and this is a part that often goes missing because teachers don't want to put students on the spot, and students often don't want to be quizzed. But this is for the teacher's benefit, not for the student's benefit. I want to make sure that my students are actually understanding the thing that I'm trying to explain to them. So I need to make sure that that's actually happening. And you can't just rely on head nods because people will just nod their heads to be polite. What you can do instead is you can have people answer questions on a whiteboard, or you can have them all do a Slack thread and all press enter at the same time. Those are more heavy duty checks for understanding where you're asking full questions and expecting full responses. But you can also do something like, hey, respond with an emoji for how comfortable you feel with the topic. Or fist to 5, how comfortable do you feel with this topic now? So those are lower friction ones that I would do occasionally, but also mix them in with the question and answer type ones as well. You can also make it anonymous. So there's tools like Slido that you were seeing in the last keynote, and that's a really great tool for making this anonymous. So this isn't about the students. This isn't something that you're ever going to grade them on or do a gotcha or anything like that. It's for you as a teacher to make sure that you're teaching things effectively to your students and they're understanding. We all have off days. I have taught certain things millions of times, and sometimes it just doesn't go as well as normal. And so sometimes you need to reteach that thing. Classroom culture. So this is something that you need to intentionally build. I think a lot of people think that classroom culture will just come along magically, but it's something that needs to be architected and implemented intentionally. So again, with my developer advocacy team that I lead, I have everybody write personas. So here are the exact people that I'm writing to. Every single blog post has one person in mind that is being written to. And when I started blogging, it was to my former self, the person who was insecure about my programming skills, who didn't know if I really wanted to stay in the industry and had a really tough time learning a lot of these things. And so I was writing to her, the past version of me, and that's often a great person to start teaching to. But it could also be somebody different as well. It could be whoever you're targeting at work. It could be your beginner developer, any of those things. Also, if you're teaching workshops, you can do like a quick survey ahead of time. What I've been doing recently for virtual workshops, because I've been doing a lot of those, is having everybody describe in one emoji their comfort level with the topic. And if there's like 3 different topics that I'm teaching about, like an emoji to describe each of those 3 subtopics. And it's not perfect, but it does give me a good grasp, like, hey, the organizer of this conference told me that everybody was going to be really, really advanced with React, but it turns out they're much more on the beginner scale, so I'm going to have to tweak this a little bit and step back back in my teaching. I do also do that though, of talking to conference organizers beforehand, like who's the person at your conference? There's going to always be a range, but having that description ahead of time of who you're going to be generally speaking to is pretty helpful. Are these professional developers, or are these learners, or are these people who have been in the industry 10 years, or people who have been in the industry 6 months? It's really helpful to have that when you're tailoring your talk. Set clear expectations. So if you have a longer class, have some sort of syllabus. These learning objectives really play into that as well. Adult learners just like to have control over their own learning, so the more information you can pre-give, the better. Actually, what I would do is pre-give all of my materials ahead of time. And I do this a lot of times with my talks too, more my technical talks than my more teaching-focused ones, but I give the slides out ahead of time. So if anybody wants to follow along on their own machines, they can. And that's really great for accessibility as well. So that's something that I would recommend if you are doing more technical stuff. Create a safe place to fail. You want people to be able to experiment, try things out, and not get punished if they're not right all the way there at the beginning. Make sure you're creating a safe place for people to grow. Also, make sure that people can teach each other. I think that this comes back to that idea of you all do in group work, of have the students who are really clicking with something, teach it to somebody that's next to them. I do this a lot for checks for understanding too, and walk around a classroom. Hey, explain X concept to the person next to you, and then they'll explain Y concept to you afterwards. Then you rotate the room and hear what they're saying and maybe correct people along the way, but it really helps to grow them as well, that their teaching skills, their communication skills, everything like that. And I would also do this with students where on their last, or one of their last days of class, they would teach themselves a new topic and then write a blog post on it. So they were teaching the community, and that's great for building out their portfolios as well. So mirror the career world in the classroom. I did this as much as humanly possible. I think one of the speakers yesterday was talking about how nobody in schools was learning GitHub or open source. Well, my students were. I wanted to say the whole time, like, all my students have been using GitHub since day one. We would use those for classroom questions. Sometimes we'd use GitHub issues. They would submit all of their homework using pull requests. We would do retrospectives at the end of class. So we would do stand-ups every day as well. So mirroring as much of their eventual career world as possible within the classroom so that they would feel comfortable when we got to that point. So I say to mirror the career world as much as possible. Like, don't use foobar badge. Nobody knows what that means. It's just confusing to everybody. But also make it fun sometimes. So I would hook learners in. I taught this one course where all the students were like just out of college, and every Friday, a lot of them would come in looking like they may have had rough Thursday nights, going out a little bit. And so what I would do is do like a fun themed app every Friday. So a Britney Spears fan app or a Beyonce shopping app, something like that to really hook them in and be relevant to their age group and audience, things that they cared about. People are way more likely to pay attention if they care about the topic. My friend Jake, who's speaking in that room right now, is using Ted Lasso as his example. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure a lot of people here do, and I'm sure that is making the talk really, really fun for them. So some other general teaching tips. So link new information to information that they already know. And a personal learning tool that I've been using a ton is Obsidian, but there's also like Rome Research and all these things where you can link your notes to other types of notes, and it creates a graph for you. It's the coolest thing because associating new concepts with concepts you already know is one of the most effective ways to learn something. Learning that in context of these different things and grouping them all together. So I would highly recommend one of those. And if you're teaching something, make sure to link it to what they already know. Also, learning styles are mostly BS, but people do like learning in different ways. And it's really, really great to give the same information in different formats. So teaching them via video and then teaching them via readings. So I would pre-assign readings for a lot of my classes so that people wouldn't be seeing information for the first time in the classroom. They'd be pre-reading it first. Also, like videos and things like that are really great as well. even interactive learning that more and more sites are coming out with, like Code Academy. I think those are really great to reinforce learning. And of course, building things. I'm just going to keep reinforcing that. Make sure that you're building stuff. Going over material multiple times is important too. You don't want information to be seen once and then just forgotten about. Active retrieval is one of the best ways to actually learn. So if you're quizzing somebody about the information that they've learned, that's going to make it so that they have to retrieve that information. It's going to make it stick much better. So make sure that you're not talking about one topic and then forgetting it. You can also use a lot of interactive tools to build games and gamify it as well. And then you can have teams and make people compete against each other, and it becomes really fun. You can do like Jeopardy type games, all sorts of things like that, just to make sure that you're reviewing things and making it so that people have to actively retrieve that information. Also, make sure that you're teaching really for your student, not for yourself. I see this with a lot with developers where they want to instill all the knowledge that they've had in 30 years in 30 minutes to somebody that they're teaching, and it just doesn't go over well. Start with the beginning, give bite-sized pieces of knowledge, and then as they grow, you can give them more and more. But start small, work up from there, and start with the very beginning and the basics. So people's attention spans are pretty short and getting shorter due to things like social media and having pocket computers and all that. So make sure that if you're teaching somebody to vary the teaching so that you can keep people hooked. So that I do, you do, you all do, you do. What I would do is try to make each one of those segments like 11 to 13 minutes long, so then we could change the modality after that amount of time. Makes it so that people stay interested and still care about the topic. And if you're making something like a YouTube video, maybe 11 to 13 minutes is a good amount of time for that. Also, make sure to take breaks. People's brains are going to work the best if you're taking breaks and allowing them to have a diffuse mind for a little bit where they can connect the topics themselves. And that's why lectures are a super flawed model. Did anybody else in college have like 2.5 hour long lectures where it was just somebody talking at you the whole entire time? Yeah, pretty brutal. Yeah, would not recommend that. In fact, I feel bad now because that's kind of what I'm doing in a conference talk. Yeah, sorry everybody. So another thing that I think is really important is to lecture to the middle. So if you are teaching a wide crowd, teach the people who are in the middle of that. And there's always going to be outliers. There are going to be people who do not get it. There are going to be people who got it within the first 30 seconds of the lesson. Those people are both going to need your attention, but do that one-on-one. Focus on the vast majority of the group and getting them to where they need to be, and then you can give one-on-one attention to those outliers. There's ways that you can do this. So one way to do it is having tiered activities. So if you give everybody an exercise that they should be working on, have 3 steps to that, but also maybe 2 bonuses. So if they finish more quickly, they can work on those bonus activities that are more difficult and are going to require them to maybe look something else up on their own or something along those lines. For the people who are struggling a little bit more, maybe part of that exercise is going back and reviewing a topic, or maybe that's their homework if they're struggling a little bit more. Also make sure to have things like office hours where people can ask questions one-on-one, and make sure that people feel comfortable in those as well. So those are ways that you can appeal to people one-on-one. Also, tangents usually confuse people. So if you're starting in one place, then going to another place, and then another place, I've taught with people like this. They have so many great stories. It's so great to learn from them, but people end up getting confused. So try to stick to what you've prepared and do prepare for these types of things. Break down jargon. Use jargon. It's the industry language, but break it down. Explain it to them. What does this word mean? And do it the first couple times that you use that word too. Don't just do it once. Hey, remember variables? Yeah, can somebody explain those for me? Amazing. Okay, let's use those again. Break down the concepts and the jargon over and over. Also, take breaks, come back to concepts. Learning how to learn, which is a Coursera course, it's free, is one of my favorite things. It talks about the focus and diffuse mindset. So focus is when you're concentrating on learning something. Diffuse is when you take time away from that thing and make the connections between that and other things. So everybody has probably seen like the programmer meme that you solve your bugs in the shower, or you go walk your dog and that's how you solve your bugs. Well, that's a living embodiment of this. That's what you're doing then. You're taking a break, you're stepping away from a while, your brain's making connections, and then you're able to solve the thing. So make sure that you're instilling that in your students too. Tell them to actually take out time off during the weekend. Make sure that they are stepping away from the topic as well, not spending 24/7 on it. It's gonna be too hard. Also, I really believe in this idea of the gradual release of responsibility, and do this with employees too. Right at first, you hold their hand, you give them steps for things, you tell them exactly what to do, you probably lectured all the information that they're going to actually need for that assignment, but as you go on, you want them to be able to teach themselves. So release that responsibility over to them. Maybe they have to look things up in order to get the answer. Maybe they're given a more vague assignment that they have to put the steps together and the plan together in order to execute on it. So this is a gradual thing. Make them trust you up front and build up that trust that you're there to catch them. But you want the learning to be more and more in their hands as you go along. So this is a huge one, especially for you all conference speakers. So answer questions. Questions are amazing. But if you get that really left field question that isn't really relevant to everybody else in the audience, you're wasting all of their time as well. So be like, hey, that's an awesome question. Maybe we can talk about it later after this. Or, hey, that's great, but can I actually get you in touch with one of the solutions architects at work? They can help you better than I can right now. You don't need to answer all of these things right at once. You can parking lot them and say, great question, but now is not really the time. That's not really relevant to what we're doing. Say it nicer than that. But you don't want to confuse your beginners or bore your more advanced people. So try to do some of that more one-on-one. Also, Bloom's taxonomy. You don't need to know everything. Fact-based knowledge is the base of the pyramid. So knowing something like CSS, uses curly braces and text, is like conceptual knowledge. That's very base knowledge. Sorry, I'm like speaking too much. CSS is, and then knowing more conceptual knowledge is better than that. So CSS is used to style web pages. That's a tier up from there. And then procedural knowledge would be able to build a page with CSS. So that's another tier up. And then higher from that is metacognitive, which is knowing your strong and weak points with CSS, and maybe even being able to build like a CSS framework yourself or something along those lines. So it's linked into Bloom's taxonomy, which I talked about before, but you start with remembering, then you understand, and then you apply your knowledge, you analyze it, evaluate, and then the very tippy top is create. So if you're able to create something with that knowledge, that's the best way to go. Also, review, review, review. Don't make your lesson be the first time that they see the material. Set a pre-reading or something like that so that they're seeing it multiple times. Make them quiz themselves and come back to topics with review games or exercises that test a big width of knowledge. So here's more code-specific teaching. So use best practices, no foobar baz, we don't want to see that. Unless you're using bad examples of variable names, then you can use them for that, but outside of that, don't use those. Use real-world examples, try to make it as real as possible, create things like e-commerce apps instead of just a toy app. Build something that is going to be meaningful for them and mirror what they'll do in the real world. Also teach the how and the why, not just the syntax. Why is this thing important and how do you use it? Don't just teach them how to create a variable. I know this is my biggest point that I keep bringing up, but it is so important that people are actually able to build. So talking about the thing is way less important than building a thing. And it's okay to not know something yourself too, and showing that to your learners can make it so that they feel comfortable not knowing something in the future too. So, hey, I don't know the answer to that yet, but let's look it up together in the next break. It's going to make it so that they know that you are not this like all-knowing person, There's some humility there, but they know that we can keep extending and learning all together. So another thing is to focus on intrinsic motivation, especially with adult learners. So a lot of them already have some sort of extrinsic motivation. Like they're wanting to learn this for their job. They're wanting to change their career. All those things are big motivators in and of themselves. You don't have to add something artificial like grades in there to make it so that they're motivated. In fact, those grades can make it so that they're focusing more on getting a good grade than they are about actually learning the thing. And I'm sure so many of you went through that in school too, where you just memorized things for a test. As soon as that test came, you forgot absolutely everything because you just crammed for it. Well, that's because your motivation was the grade, not actually learning the material. And so adult learners are usually self-motivated enough that you can skip things like grades. That's what I would do. I was really, really against grading. Give it good feedback though. As an instructor, that's the best thing that you can do is give really good feedback about how somebody is doing, what they're doing well on. And so I normally have like criteria for graduation that people would have to fulfill, but not actual grades or anything like that. And we do pass-fail for assignments too. So passing was they made a lot of effort on the thing. Failing was they did not put a lot of effort on the thing. So if they had like one console log in there, that's not doing the assignment. But if they did not get the right answer, but they tried to get the right answer, that's pretty valuable still. And so we'd be okay with that. Also, like large chunks of code clearly copied and pasted from the internet, not so great either, not learning from that. So let's talk about teaching online specifically, because I know that's something that a lot more people are having to do now. So breakout rooms in Zoom are a godsend. If you've not used them, they allow you to put smaller groups of a Zoom call in different rooms. So you can say breakout room of 4 people, and if there's 12 people in the call, it'll put 4 people in 3 different breakout rooms. And this is so, so, so nice for doing assignments, group work, building those bonds between students, even though they're online. The really nice thing about teaching in person is that you can go over to everybody's computer and make sure that they're actually doing the thing and that they don't have some sort of bug or computer that's going completely haywire. And so you can't do that online, right? So what you can do though is turn it over to them. Hey, I know you've got this bug that you're asking me about. It's your turn to screen share the whole class. We're gonna try to debug this together. And then that usually solves 5 people's bug at once. And it's pretty fun too. You just gotta build people's comfort with it. Also, still be intentional about building a classroom culture, even though it's remote. It can feel a little bit less personal, but having a culture of doing things like cameras on, and I know that's not realistic for everybody, so definitely have exceptions to that for people who can't. But if you can, make it so that people are learning face-to-face, they're seeing each other be engaged, you can see when somebody has a question, all that is really important. In addition, if you can have some sort of activities for them, so if you can still do virtual game nights or happy hours or something along those lines so people are still building bonds with each other, that's going to improve everybody's learning. So still be really intentional about building that classroom culture, even if you're remote. And Slack is so great for checks for understanding. I hinted at this before, but you can tell everybody to send a message on Slack at exactly the same time so you can see everybody's answer right at once. You can do emoji reactions. You can have everybody DM you on Slack if you want. So all of those tools are going to make it so that you can teach more effectively, even if you're online. Make recordings if you can. Record yourself teaching. That's going to make it so that if somebody misses the lesson or somebody just didn't get it during the lesson, they can rewatch that. And it's going to be another way for them to learn. So if you can, do that. And work to keep students engaged. So still take breaks even though they're remote. Have fun conversation questions, still do the checks for understanding, find ways to keep people engaged even though they're remote. It can be much, much harder in that environment too, especially if everybody's just like cameras off, no speaking. I had a workshop like that recently and it was just so depressing. It's like, I don't know if anybody's learning anything from this. I'm just talking to a bunch of squares on Slack or on Zoom. So make sure that they're staying engaged. That being said, I actually taught remote before the pandemic, and there's such a geographic power to it. Like I was teaching a cohort of students who are in Iowa who would not have the access to a coding boot camp from New York City if we were all co-located. And so I think there's a lot of power in that and the ability to bring tech to more people if we can teach online. So even though it's a little bit more challenging, there is a huge value to it too. And asynchronous materials really help people too, like YouTube videos and blog posts and all that is teaching as well. So make sure to review at the end. So teaching is probably something that you already do. If not, you should start now. Make sure to prep your learners that it's going to be hard to learn, especially if they've been away from a classroom for a while. Here's the structure of a lesson. You give them the objectives up front. You do the framing of why something's important. I do, we do, you all do, you do, and repeat that over and over and over again for how much time you have. Breaks and review at the end. You can tell that I did that for this lesson. So first it was the learning objectives, then why you should care about this, and then I talked about things, and then we're reviewing now. So here's all the advice that I gave. I like to put it on one slide in case anybody wants to take a picture. I won't run through it again, but if you want, it's all right there. Awesome. I'm glad people are using this. I'll also tweet out these slides afterwards if anybody wants them. The keynote ones are in PowerPoint, so I probably won't be able to send those out, but these ones are in slides, so I can send them out. And more resources. So if you want to learn more about teaching, these are some of my favorite resources. Make It Stick, which is a book that talks all about teaching methodologies. How to Teach Online. Maria Weaver is my former manager at General Assembly, and she made this amazing course at the beginning of the pandemic about how to teach online because a lot of teachers were moving to teaching online, and that's what she did. So she made a course all about it. At least at the beginning of the pandemic, it was free. I'm not sure if it still is, but I believe it's pretty good. Learning How to Learn by Barbara Oakley. This is an amazing course on Coursera. It's, again, free. Unless you want some certification that you did it, which I don't know if you really do. She also has a really great newsletter that comes out every week and a couple books. So multiple modalities that you can learn from Barbara Oakley. And then I also really appreciate Ness Labs. They have a ton of information about psychology, and I think psychology is so linked to teaching and learning. And so she has really, really great resources there as well. And I feel so lucky to be able to be a part of people's learning journey. It's so amazing. I've learned so much personally from teaching. So keep in touch. I'm a Spittel everywhere. And I think we have a few minutes for questions too, if anybody has any. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So that's why I started blogging. That's the exact reason why. So I started blogging. I challenged myself each week to learn something new that I was seeing on social media, to then build a demo with it, so build an app with it, and then write a blog post about it. That was way overwhelming. I could not keep up with all of that. It was ridiculous. But that got me in the habit of blogging and sharing what I was learning, and I started doing conference talks based off of that, and it kept me really hooked in with the community. And so I got to learn from them, and they got to learn from me, and I built up so many friendships that way. So I would really, really highly recommend teaching yourself in order to teach somebody else, because it gives you this like extrinsic motivation that will keep you accountable and keep you learning and growing. I think you also just you pick up so much from having to explain something in depth too, that I ended up learning way more when I was teaching than when I was a normal software engineer. So I think you'll learn more than you think you would. I would also super recommend having a personal learning management tool, like something like Obsidian or Notion, that you're taking your own notes in and connecting different things. And you could almost just repurpose that as content down the road too, if you want to teach somebody else. Take all these links to things and put them all together into something that somebody else can learn from too. Does that answer your question? Cool, awesome.